Welcome to this explainer. We're diving right into a pretty explosive piece of political commentary today, specifically focusing on the Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA. Now, we aren't here to take sides or tell you what to think. Instead, our goal is to objectively unpack exactly what this source material is arguing. We're going to look directly at the original quotes, the documents, and the candidate profiles that the commentator uses to build his case.
Right out of the gate, the source video hits us with a bombshell. It opens by citing this alleged tweet from a recently victorious congressional candidate out in New York, and it instantly sets a deeply alarming tone. The host uses this specific quote to frame this political movement, not just as a shift in everyday policy, but as a literal existential threat to the current American way of life. I mean, he puts a huge emphasis on that concept of total eradication.
So you might be wondering, what exactly is fueling such an intense reaction? Well, to figure that out, we really need to understand the foundation of the host's warnings. We're going to walk through his argument step by step and see exactly how he puts all these puzzle pieces together.
To make sense of this sprawling 10-minute commentary, we're going to break it down into 5 quick parts: the core claim, the actual platform, the candidates, their strategy, and finally, the host's big warning. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the video's core claim. The host really doesn't mince words here. He paints the current political scene as a stark, binary choice. The way he sees it, the future of the country is split between nationalism on the right and what he explicitly describes as communism or socialism actively infiltrating the left. According to him, this isn't just your standard political maneuvering, He views it as a calculated, radical plot designed to entirely hijack the traditional Democratic Party from the inside out. Moving on to section 2, let's unpack the actual DSA platform to see how he backs up that core claim. Now, this is where the host really sounds the alarm as he reads through these specific policy proposals. Straight from what he identifies as their official platform, he is frankly astounded. We're talking about abolishing the Senate, defunding the military, getting rid of prisons, opening borders, and even pushing for public ownership of major corporations. For the host, a country that does all this isn't a country anymore. It would instantly become an unlivable jungle. He argues that taking away all police and prison funding would just result in total anarchy, where regular, vulnerable citizens are left completely defenseless. And he highlights this exact quote from their platform to really drive his point home. The ultimate goal here, he argues, isn't just about passing a few progressive laws. It's about a complete and total overhaul of the American constitutional system. By stripping away an independent executive and judicial branch and putting all that power directly under Congress, the host warns they're attempting to systematically dismantle the very checks and balances that have defined the United States since day one. That brings us to section 3, candidates in controversy, where we shift from written documents to the actual people running for office. The video draws a massive line in the sand between two very different groups. On one side, you've got your traditional establishment Democrats, who the host says are currently in an absolute state of panic because they're rapidly losing control of their own base. They're painted as politicians willing to actually compromise and work within the system. But on the other side, you have these new DSA candidates who the host labels as post-American. And by that, he means they have zero respect for traditional systems and just want to tear the whole enterprise down completely. To prove his point about this new breed of politician, he zeroes in on a specific candidate who actually won in New York's 13th district. He presents her as an extremist who, in his words, is totally unqualified, an unemployed PhD candidate who somehow managed to defeat a powerful, longtime incumbent. Going through her alleged social media history, the commentator paints a picture of someone who openly disparages American institutions, hurls race-based insults, and pushes policies that he believes literally endanger the public. But here's what's especially interesting about his argument. The host brings up a quote from a completely different candidate out in Colorado talking about the 9/11 attacks. He uses this to warn his audience that, hey, these aren't the chaotic street protesters you see on the news. These operatives are highly polished, they're media savvy, they speak in a very calm, demure way. Yet underneath that polish, he argues, they harbor incredibly dangerous anti-American sentiments, like seamlessly shifting the blame for global terrorism right back onto the United States. So, how exactly are they planning to pull off these massive systemic changes? Let's hit section 4, the strategy of entryism. The commentator points to a very revealing tweet from DSA co-chair Josh Block. The gist? They have absolutely zero loyalty to the Democratic Party. None. They aren't trying to sing kumbaya in some big tent coalition. Instead,
They view the traditional Democratic establishment as nothing more than a tool to be used for ballot access, and ultimately an obstacle that needs to be removed. It's a calculated, step-by-step strategy. The source video argues they're basically using the established party structure as a Trojan horse. You get elected using a familiar, safe-sounding label, you tap into the party's funding and resources, and then you actively push a radical agenda from the inside. The endgame? Kicking the traditional establishment out of their own party infrastructure entirely. Which leads us right into our final section, the host's warning of an existential threat. So, what is the ultimate consequence, according to this video? The host is practically begging his listeners to wake up to this reality. He truly doesn't see this as just normal political friction. He sees an imminent, existential threat to the country. He's urging people to educate themselves before they're caught flat-footed by these kinds of candidates running in their own backyards.
He's warning that if these policies become reality, if you strip the military, abolish the police, and totally erase the borders, it's a guaranteed recipe for unchecked violence and economic collapse. He predicts a society where the vulnerable are just preyed upon, where your property is seized under the guise of public ownership, and where the American way of life is, quite literally, wiped out. And he argues this whole movement is being turbocharged by a very specific, brand new voting coalition. He claims it's a mix of overeducated, downward mobile progressive organizers teaming up with mass migrant voting blocs. Pointing to recent New York elections as proof, he argues that the Democratic establishment actually inadvertently created this very voting dynamic through their own open border policies. And now, well, they can no longer control the monster they built.
Look, regardless of where you personally fall on the political spectrum or what you think of the host's fiery delivery, this breakdown forces us to ask a really critical question. When highly organized, motivated factions use the established machinery of a major political party to fundamentally alter its DNA, how vulnerable are our deeply entrenched political institutions? And more importantly, how in the world will the traditional two-party system adapt to survive this kind of internal revolution? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.